Rabbi Shapiro, now that we have concluded our series of 4 webinars on the topics of anti-Semitism and especially the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, definition and explanation of anti-Semitism, I think it's important that we now try to emphasize at the ending what the main points are that we tried to make and what we would like people to take away from our webinars. Now, I interviewed Radha Karmi on the Palestinian part of this, and Radha Karmi, who is one of the outstanding Palestinian spokespeople in the world, actually, emphasized that certainly her anti-Zionism and her criticism of Israel are not and do not constitute anti-Semitism. She merely wants, personally, their family house back that was taken from her family in 1948. And she especially is antagonistic, disturbed, understandably this way, about the oppression that her people, the Palestinians, have undergone since 1948, oppression by the state of Israel. So that's Radha. So now, Rabbi Shapiro, what about our other webinars?
Well, we discussed that basically the impression that the IHRA definition gives, that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, is false, and it's also dangerous. There are 2 types of dangers. Danger number 1 is the legal danger. There are legal ramifications of it, and Professor Seidman discussed that, and those ramifications are substantial. There are also social ramifications of that, meaning that anti-Zionists will and could be branded anti-Semites according to the IHRA definition. As far as I'm concerned, in my view, the social ramifications are more concerning than the legal ones. And the reason is, I have a rule that you can't fight ideas with laws. The legal ramifications, they can illegalize people's thoughts. They could make it illegal to be an anti-Zionist, or at least penalize people, that's a better word, for being anti-Zionists. But if people have ideas, you can't change their ideas by making laws. Eventually, when there's a contest between laws versus ideas, in the long term, the ideas always win. So I think it's a mistake to tackle the IHRA definition only from a freedom of speech / legal perspective, because even if absent any freedom of speech problems, even if there's no laws or penalties for being an anti-Zionist and for anti-Zionist speech, we don't want to end up branded like the Ku Klux Klan, who also enjoy freedom of speech, but they're branded anti-Semites. That's the real danger, the greater of the 2 dangers, I should say. The branding of anti-Zionists as anti-Semites. And they'll say, okay, Ku Klux Klan has freedom of speech. We won't illegalize your speech. Go ahead. But it's just a falsehood. And that's the second thing we discussed, that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. In order to accept the idea that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism on the level that the IHRA suggests, you need to presuppose Zionist ideology. And for the most part, the main point there is that the Zionists, more than anything else, set as their goal to obtain ownership over Jewish identity. In other words, they get to say what a Jew is. They want to conflate Jewish identity with Zionism. Not only that Jews believe in Zionism in the same way that Jews believe in Judaism. It's more than that. They agree that a Jew doesn't, there are Jews that are atheists that don't believe in Judaism, but that Zionism actually constitutes a part of, or even a major part of, Jewish identity, which is nonsense.
That's what they emphasize. Zionism is part of Jewish identity.
Right. This identity thing, even that Israel is a Jewish state, that Israel being the state of the Jewish people, that's not merely a policy of Israel's, but rather it's their identity, such that if Israel would not be the Jewish state, you're liquidating Israel or you're destroying Israel. They use words like destruction and liquidation, when really what people mean is change the policy about Israel being a Jewish state, or the Jewish state, rather. They claim to be not only a Jewish state, but the Jewish state. Israel claims that Zionism claims that the state of Israel is actually the state of the Jews. And as the Zionists have put it, everybody from Netanyahu, Avigdor Lieberman, even Yair Lapid, in different words, that Japan is to the Japanese what Israel is to the Jews. Without Zionism...
And they also, I'm sorry, and they also make this claim repeatedly that this state of Israel can be and actually is both a Jewish state and a democratic state.
Right. Now, they keep changing the definition of a Jewish state depending upon which part of that equation they want to represent. If they want to represent them being a democratic state, so they say, well, all Jewish state means is a state with a Jewish ethnic majority. Like, there are many Arab states, so why can't there be a Jewish state? Even though there is not a single Arab state anywhere, a single Muslim state that is Muslim in the sense that Israel claims to be a Jewish state, meaning there is no Muslim state in the world that claims to be the nation state of all Muslims. And there's no Arab state that claims to be the nation state of all Arabs. Israel claims to be the nation state of all Jews, my state. It's actually a claim on Jewish identity. It's a claim about Jewish identity. Zionism, more than anything else, is a newfangled, contrived definition of Jew and a certain type of Jewish identity that they insist everybody accept, otherwise you're an anti-Semite. And that Israel must be the state of the Jews, and that Jews must accept, the world must accept that Jews are Zionists, and that therefore anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. They want, that's what they want people to believe. And that's just false. It's I discussed that entails a whole cascade of false assumptions and false history, and that's really the emphasis. The emphasis is that Zionism is a political position, and you could be pro it or against it, the same way you could be for or against any political position without being accused of being racist or anti-Semitic or any type of hate.
Yes, I think that's our main point that we want to get across. But then perhaps we ought to finally end this with our definition of anti-Semitism, which is short but is to the point.
Anti-Semitism is hostility or discrimination against Jews as Jews, meaning Jews because they're Jews. You could also say any negative attitude or action towards Jews because they're Jews. The main point is because they're Jews. If there's an individual Jew whose behavior you don't like, or an individual Jewish institution whose behavior you don't like, including the state of Israel, which must be looked at as maximum a individual Jewish institution, and you have complaints about their behavior or even their infrastructure, you could be right, you could be wrong, but that's not anti-Semitism. If you don't like a Jew, or you have a complaint against a Jew because he's Jewish, if the hostility is against somebody or something or group or an individual as a Jew or as Jews, that's anti-Semitism. If the hostility, discrimination, or even prejudice is not because the person is Jewish, you may be guilty of many things, including ignorance, stupidity, being wrong, you may be unfair, but that's not anti-Semitism.
Hopefully then, we in our series of webinars have made these points, and that is a good place, I think, for us to conclude. Thank you, Rabbi Shapiro.
I agree. Thank you, Norton.